إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله الذي أرسل بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I wanted to take this short time to mention a very important concept in Islam, which is a comparison between courage and knowledge. It is extremely relevant to us living in the West as Muslims, seeing our brothers and sisters suffer across the world, especially Gaza. As of now, the death toll has risen past 27,000. The statistic is not counting the ones who were buried under the rubble and nobody could have covered them. When we are seeing these atrocities committed right before us, we have a duty upon us to resist, to have activism, to speak up against oppression, and to make change, to remove this oppression. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلْتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Let there be amongst you a group. A group, ummah, is not just any group. It's not like ta'ifa, it's not like any other word you could use, jama'ah. Because ummah specifies that there is a leader and there is a unified vision within that group. That's what makes it an ummah in the first place. So a group of Muslims, not all Muslims, a group of Muslims with a unified vision to liberate the Muslim lands, living amongst us today, liberate the Muslim lands, bring an end to the oppression. That group must exist. And when we are now involved in this, a specific hadith comes to my mind that still staggered me, subhanAllah. I did my first khutbah on this, but I'm still processing it because it's a very, very insightful hadith, but it gets overlooked. And this hadith is called Hadith Shiraratul A'imma. It's called the hadith of the evil rulers. It's called this because the Prophet ﷺ says, خِيَارُ أَئِمَّتِكُمْ. The best rulers amongst you is those who, he says, تُحِبُّونَهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَكُمْ. That you love them and they love you. وَتُصَلُّونَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَيُصَلُّونَ عَلَيْكُمْ. And that you send salawat upon them and they send salawat upon you. That's what the Prophet ﷺ is talking about. These are the good rulers. You love them, they love you. You send salawat upon them, they send salawat upon you. شِرَارَةُ أَئِمَّتِكُمْ. The Prophet ﷺ says the evil rulers amongst you, he says, تُبْغِضُونَهُمْ وَيُبْغِضُونَكُمْ. He says they send, they hate you and you hate them. وَتَلْعَنُونَهُمْ وَيَلْعَنُونَكُمْ. And you send la'na upon them and they send la'na upon you, meaning curse. You curse one another. These are your evil rulers. The hadith goes on, but if you were just to take these two categories given in this hadith, that these good rulers and then these evil rulers, and you now try to apply this concept to the Muslim lands today, what relationship do you see between the Muslims and the rulers? Are they constantly making dua that, Ya Allah, preserve these rulers, continue them, make them, prolong them over here? Is that what he's talking about? Or do we see the opposite, where the Muslims are cursing their rulers and asking for their removal? If you ask yourself this question and just take a look at the Muslim world, you see the latter. You see it full of evil rulers. And the relationship between the rulers and the relationship between the rulers and the subjects is one of hate, is one of cursing one another. When's the last time you heard one of the Muslim rulers get on the minbar? Get on any podium, in fact. Forget the Jumu'ah Khutbah that they're supposed to be doing themselves. Get on any podium and make dua for the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That's the last thing you'll see them do. They'll put their nation before that. They'll make dua for their own nation, which they don't do, by the way, either. But if they did, that's what they would do first. So you see where the world fits right now within this hadith. Shiraru a'immatikum. These are the evil rulers that we are looking at today. What's more important that follows this right now is the reaction when the Sahaba heard this hadith. When the Sahaba, all of them together, sitting, listening to this hadith by the Prophet ﷺ, they say, قِيلَ يَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ ﷺ أَفَلَا نَنَادِلُهُمْ بِسَيْفٍ. Shall we not remove these people with our swords? Well, I thought, the Sahaba are going to say, we're going to make dua against them, so much dua against them. We're going to pray so much against them. No. Their gut reaction, collectively, was that, shouldn't we just remove them with our swords? Why? Why was this the gut reaction of the Sahaba? This is because the Sahaba, they had these two things we call Izzah wal Karama, honor and dignity. When the Sahaba heard this, they could not imagine a situation where there is an evil ruler living over them, which implies a great deal of things. It implies that all of the policies and the oppression this evil ruler is doing is affecting them. It's affecting their neighbors. It's affecting their families. It's affecting everybody they know, the people they know that's living amongst them. All of them are suffering for this one individual that is so oppressive. They could not imagine just standing by and watching such oppression take place in front of them. And so they had the dignity and honor and courage to stand up and speak and say, no, how could I let something like this happen? I would remove him with my sword. Right? And so this tells us something very important. Number one, the Sahaba had Izzah and Karama for a reason. Just like every other person, Sahaba and Sahabi at the time. And even the Mushrikeen. They had Izzah and Karama because Arabia was never formally colonized, was it? It was surrounded by Rome, it was surrounded by Persia, these two superpowers, but they never really came to Arabia. They could not. They sent their armies, 100,000 people, 200,000 people, they're lasting 2 days in the blazing heat. That's all. Much less getting to the center of Arabia, or I guess the corner center of Arabia where Hijaz is. They couldn't get there. They couldn't colonize Arabia. So Arabia was a place that was never formally colonized. And when it was never formally colonized, this aspect of freedom, it was retained within the people. Okay? They knew what it means when you're selling your freedom to somebody else. That death is preferable, actually, many would argue, to becoming a person who's enslaved for the rest of their lives, tortured for the rest of their lives, has no free will of his own. And so when they had this Izzah and Karama, because they were never formally colonized, in fact, I gave the example of the Sahaba. One of the people who became a Sahabi later, her name is Hind bint Utbah, a familiar name to some of you. She was a person who hired the spearman Wahshi to kill the best friend and uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, who was his uncle, but they were the same age. So best friend is a better relationship example between the two. They were the same age. When he was killed in the battle of Uhud, Hind bint Utbah that would go over his corpse and mutilate it, and pick up his liver and chew it and spit it out. Despicable acts. She would accept Islam later on. And because she accepted Islam later on, she would have to give what's called the bay'ah, meaning the pledge of allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ. And she was giving the pledge of allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ. One of the things she had to say, along with the shahada, testifying there's la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah ﷺ. She also had to say the statement, I will not commit zina. It was part of the bay'ah statement. I will not steal, I will not involve in riba, and I will not do zina. When it came to the statement, I will not do zina, she buckled up. She couldn't say it. And when she was asked, say you won't do zina. Her response was, if I say something like this, that I will not do zina, it implies I otherwise would have. That if I don't accept Islam right now, I would have. And I cannot fathom the concept of a free woman committing zina. That's something only for women that have no free will, for survivability. It's a very back-end door. It's a very degrading act. I would never admit to something. I would never even give this thing the assumption to exist within me. That reaction comes, once again, comes from honor and dignity. That comes from a sense of self-respect. However, if you fast forward in time, and you take a look at the state of the ummah as it is now, one could not get over the fact that this ummah is one that is faced with colonialism. Everything that happened pretty much from the 18th century onwards, especially in the 20th century, after the fall of the Uthmani Khilafah and the atrocious acts that was taken place against Muslims afterwards, we were colonized. And that is simply the reality. And what follows colonialism, what follows being colonized, is the restriction of freedom or absolute taking away of freedom of the population that is being colonized. Right? And when you have a population that takes away the free will, and they are made to be submissive, these are people that lose all dignity, and in fact, they become very little different from animals in that context if they become okay, if they do not resist occupation, if they do not fight against the colonizers. Why do I say that? Because the thing that separates the human being from the animal is our free choice, our free will, right? The ability we have to choose. And if we take this ability of choice we have, that if we do it correctly, we can be better than angels, But if we use it incorrectly, we'll be worse than animals. If we take this and we give it up to some colonial regime, how are you any different than the animal now giving up to its captive? No free will. You've given it up. You have not resisted. You have not spoken up against the oppression. This is a very despicable view of a person. But this is the reality. Colonialism has effects. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. I will not burden a soul more than what they can bear. It doesn't mean just because you're colonized that you are now doomed to a slave mindset. That is not the meaning. That is a natural consequence, but a person who truly fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be able to overcome this mindset, will be able to overcome this disease. But if you do not fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if you do not uphold these obligations, you become a person who is plagued with cowardice. That's what you become. What does that look like? A person plagued with cowardice. If you talk about the atrocities that are happening in this ummah right now, you tell them about what's happening in the jails of Syria right now, under the Assad regime right now. The people of our ummah, our mothers and sisters being raped. I saw a video where one of them was being burned alive on television, recorded. And you show this to a person and says, we need to do something about this. We cannot let oppression like this go any longer. The response of a person with a slave mindset is, what can we do? I'm a weak person myself, yeah. I'm miskeen. I'm not a perfect person myself. I really need to focus on myself right now. That is a natural response of somebody who's plagued with this mindset. Oppression doesn't faze them. They are used to it. They've given up their free choice. They've given up the idea of resistance. They've given up the idea of voicing for the oppressed. That's all gone. What their focus is themselves. I got my life that I really need to focus on right now. That suffering and stuff, that can go on. No problem for me. In fact, this idea of cowardice, of enacting the slave mindset, is so atrocious to the idea of knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the first person sentenced to hellfire as a scholar who only did it for the fame, who only did it for the public recognition, did not do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Really, that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. If you truly had courage, if you went against your desires, if you went against the mainstream public that is legitimizing oppression, and you spoke up despite the hate, despite the backlash, you didn't do it for the public, you did it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you took that harsh path, you wouldn't find yourself in the situation that you are today. Speaking of that scholar in this hadith, this right here is a story that we must all hold dear. Because in the West, we must be involved in activism. We must be involved in a sort of standing up for the oppressed in our best capabilities. And when we do that, we are faced with opposition. That's true. Malcolm X, during his time when he used to fight against racism, he had to address the clear idea. There were black activists at the time that were asking for freedom. And a reporter asked him, why? Why exactly? Why don't you just join them in that manner? Why are you so harsh in your mannerisms, in the way you are asking for oppression? And he said, I'm not asking for oppression, I'm fighting for it. And anybody who's asking for oppression, he says, is a person that's doomed for eternal slavery. That person's never escaping. Asking the person that subdued you and colonized you against morals, that filthy act that they did, and you're asking them out of their good heart to free you, I'll never do something like that. Freedom is something that I'm going to fight for. And he said that, and he ended with the phrase that really I probably even shut the reporter down, is that the price of freedom is death. If that's what it costs for me to be a free man, I'm going to give my life up for it. Because I cannot imagine myself, my people, generations on end, being okay with such oppression, being known to having oppression like this normalized. And so he fought against it. So I say this, knowledge and cowardice do not mix. Knowledge and cowardice do not mix. We've seen stories like this, the stories of the Muslims showing their izzah and karama during the worst times of the ummah. This is the 20th century I'm speaking about, when Kashmir, the Dogra regime of India, the Dogra regime of India was taking over Pakistan after the separation, or actually at the time of separation. And the Muslims were fighting and resisting against them. Dhuhr time came around, and there was a prison camp of Muslims. And one of them got up to do adhan. And the despicable regime, the Dogra regime was, they saw that person says Allahu Akbar, They raised the rifle and shot at this person. Young person got up to do it, then they said Allahu Akbar, they shot him down. And he died on the spot. You think that was the end of the story, except another young person stands up from the prison cell and says Allahu Akbar. He says the second one, he gets shot at as well. His life gone right there. And then another one stands up to complete Allahu Akbar, and another one, and another one. They try to complete the adhan one after another. This was, I believe, 1943. The day 22 young Muslims died in Kashmir to just call the adhan. A day marked in history that we will all remember. This is what resistance looks like. I'm not out here calling for anything reckless. I'm not out here calling for anything that is, illegal, anything of the sort. I'm highlighting the idea of slave mindset plaguing us when we're doing activism and being so fearful, and a lack of courageousness that people before us have given us great examples of. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be courageous in our activism. And I pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to stand up for the truth no matter the consequences they face. As long as we're on the truth, you should not be afraid of speaking up about it, voicing up about it. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المؤمنين والحمد لله رب العالمين.